Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. This is Milton Herring. I'm the chairman of the Culture Transformation Network. And right now I have with me some really great, outstanding young men that have a heart for what we're going to talk about today and the purpose of this gathering today. And we'll build on top of this. But we're just basically want to help out pastors, leaders, ministers, those that have some type of leadership capability or role that are dealing with mental health issues, which is a topic that not a lot of people talk about but needs to be discussed. And here at Culture Transformation Network, we want to make sure that we're opening the forum for those that are dealing with things of this nature, that they have a place to come, a safe space where they can listen, they can glean, they can discuss. And I've got with me on the call today Randy Dean and Danny James. Randy, would you take a minute to introduce yourself?
Yes. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here today and to share in this moment. Again, my name is Randy Dean. I've been a pastor since the age of 19. So we do the math. I'm not going to tell you how old I am. I'll just say I've been doing this a long time. Been in ministry for several years and have a variety of different experiences, including pastoring my own church twice. And so forth, and being in ministry in various capacities and facilitating workshops for men and sharing issues and topics that deal with challenges that men and pastors and leaders deal with. And so I wanted to use my platform, my experiences as a pastor to speak into the lives of other men and leaders and really share things that I think could be relevant and beneficial to them in their spiritual walk as well as their natural.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks for joining us today. How about you, Danny James? Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me as well. I'm really grateful to be here and very passionate about this topic. I personally come from a little bit of a different background. I would consider myself more of a layman in the church, even though I do sit on the board of directors and do hold the leadership role within my church. I very much operate day to day like most of the people that are coming to your church. But I do have some great perspective because I work very closely with my pastor and we address these issues head on. And so I'm really grateful to touch on this, and I think it does need to be said, Milton.
Awesome. Thanks for both of you guys for joining us today. And really, you both are right. This is a topic that needs to be discussed. And really the purpose of these as we continue to build a platform for this type of topic, we're really looking to really highlight mental health and the challenges that go along with that. Really give you some real world experience, some spiritual wisdom as well, and some guidance, some practical wisdom to help you either navigate through or help you overcome, and knowing that you're not in this alone. That's what we really want to get across, that you're not in this alone. And so we have some topics we're going to just briefly talk about some of the upcoming topics as we build into really leading into making this a more showcase for you to be able to invite other people in. And also at some point when COVID's lifted and we're kind of back to semi-normal, really to gather together as we put maybe some leadership workshops together. We'll do more seminars, things as we go along, virtual seminars as well, to help you, give you a place to come and to get refreshed and also to get some wisdom. So really looking forward to this time and this topic, especially spending this time with these two great men of God right here we have on this Zoom call. So first thing I want to ask you guys this, and I'll start with you, Randy. One of the topics that are coming up is depression. How would you think that it shows up? And then Danny, you could chime in at any point too.
Well, the first thing you have to understand is that depression is something that does hit all spheres of life, right? So you have all people that deal with depression, even in church and in leadership within church. And I'll share with you just a little bit of my own experience and kind of segue into answering your question about how it shows up. I pastored the church for several years, and I struggled with depression myself. Now, how that depression actually showed up came out in very unhealthy ways, and that's a part of how depression can show up. But depression does show up in a variety of ways. It shows up in mood swings. Moods can be a big part of that. It can show up through sexual interest, through cognitive abilities, meaning inability to concentrate, difficulty completing tasks, delayed response during conversations. Depression also shows up through sleep patterns. It shows up through mood swings. So it can be agitation, anger, aggressiveness, anxiety, anxiousness, and restlessness. All of those things are part of depression. And believe it or not, there are a lot of pastors and leaders who struggle with depression. And one of the things that is often not really discussed, but does happen, is that there are a lot of, because that's not addressed, because we don't really talk about mental health, when depression shows up, and it shows up in the form of anger, there are a lot of pastors who go from preaching in the pulpit on Sunday to beating their wives Sunday night. That's not speculation, that's actually a fact. That happens, unfortunately. So it shows up in a variety of ways, but moods, health challenges, sexual interest, meaning either a lack of sexual desire or an unhealthy expression of it. And then cognitive abilities, as I said, and then lastly, sleep patterns. So that's a part of how depression can show up.
Wow, I think that's something we could spend a whole day talking about depression and those different variables of how it shows up. Because I in my lifetime being a leader and just being a man, there's opportunity times where, there's you hit some of those key points, Randy. So I appreciate it, and I look forward to us discussing that even further down the road. Danny, how would you say, let's talk about anxiety for a second as another hot topic when it comes to mental health. What does it look like, and why does it, and how does it manifest? Why is anxiety so easy to write off?
Yeah, this one's really close to home, actually, for me, Milton. About a year and a half ago, I found myself in the emergency room, and my heart was bothering me, right? And I thought, nothing of it. In fact, I had a kind of something in my foot going on earlier that day, and I let it run to my head, and I started worrying about it, and I started fixating on it. And before I knew it, I was laying on the couch that night, and I told my wife, I said, I think I'm having a heart attack. And she said, what? And she took that for face value, and we went to the emergency room, and come to find out, this thing can show up as it shows the exact same manifestations of a heart attack, right? So, I think it's really easy to write off, because I didn't want to address the fact that it was anxiety, right? For me, I told my wife when we left the hospital, I said, this is kind of crazy for me to say, but if it was a heart attack, at least it could be easily fixed, or at least I could take a medication for it. But anxiety is easy to write off because it manifests in so many different ways, right? And so I think it's very easy to take the mental side of it out and to put in a physical in its place. And for me, being able to actually say that I've struggled with anxiety now, when I do have those manifestations, I have to deal with, where my mental state is at. And so, yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Milton.
No, man, that does, because you know what? I'll be transparent. I had that happen this weekend, and my wife was like, you're having an anxious attack. And I was like, what am I anxious about? And that's something we need to dig in for more, right? About what is really going on in the psychology of a leader, pastor, minister, anyone type of leadership. We do deal with some underlying anxieties, and I appreciate you sharing that, Danny. So yeah, looking forward to unpacking that. Go ahead.
I have one more thought on that as well, Milton, and this is also personal for me. I know what the Bible says about anxiety, right? We can all go to that verse, right? Be anxious of nothing, right. and it's so easy to say, like, oh, I shouldn't be anxious right now, right? And you just kind of write it off, like, God, take this from me. And we don't actually deal with what is actually taking place that's causing us anxiety. And that, again, in and of itself is so easy to write off. And so, yeah, I hope that helps.
It does. I appreciate that. Yeah, we could be talking all day about some of these topics, but I want to move on. We're just going to cover really quickly some of these topics we're going to be discussing over the course of time, and I hope you join us down this journey. Mental illness, Randy. Why is it the elephant in the room?
Well, unfortunately, mental illness represents a very negative stigma. Has a negative stigma attached and associated to it. So, because we struggle to address the fact that so many people struggle and are challenged with mental illness, we don't like to talk about it because it gives a negative perception of individuals. And so therefore, instead of dealing with it, we push it aside. But pushing it aside does nothing to take care of this problem. The reality is that mental illness is very real. It shows up in many ways. Just because somebody, we tend to label mental illness as someone as being schizophrenic, for example. We look at the extreme aspect or definition of mental illness. So we'll look at an example like schizophrenia and we'll say, okay, well, that's when we talk about mental illness, that's where our thoughts go. But we don't think about things like depression or anxiety or other things that could be a factor in it. There are a lot of people who struggle with that, narcissism, different things and facets that people deal with. And the fact remains that mental illness can even be found even within our church walls. There are people who go to church and they struggle with mental illness. But if we don't set a platform or create an atmosphere where it's safe to have the conversations and to really help people really address those things, then, we aren't doing anything to help anyone. So I do think in order to first get help in anything, you have to first acknowledge that there is a problem. And you have to be willing to have the conversation and remove the negative stigma associated with the term mental illness and be willing to address that and talk about it. But we don't like to talk about it because we don't want a negative self-reflection on ourselves.
Wow. Yeah. Take the weirdness, I guess, out of it, right? And just understand that it's part of our lives. Yeah. Thank you so much, Randy. How about this, Danny? How about coping with change? Another great topic. How do you think people are coping with change in the church, in leadership and family and life? How do you think that's happening?
Yeah, I mean, let's take church as an example, right? You have this routine that you, as a Christian, where you show up every Sunday morning and, you worship with the family of God and you're being fed, the word of God. And then all of a sudden that gets taken out of the picture. That's hard. And I think that we haven't done a good job at acknowledging how hard that can be on some people, especially, I think of the young Christian that needs that fellowship, that needs all that around them. So as far as coping to it goes, I think when anything is ripped away from you, we've seen this year with some of the examples being COVID-19. I mean, we've struggled with a lot of things in, just our society this year. I think that we have to acknowledge that coping is necessary in those times. And I don't know that we've done the best job at just actually addressing it and saying, we know this is really hard. Family, you have an example would be me. I'm always home now, where I used to be gone 45 hours a week. And now all of a sudden I'm placed in, at home all of the time, and I don't get to see changing sceneries or whatnot. And, my son doesn't understand, hey, daddy's at work, he's only 2 years old. There's an immense amount of coping that has to take place. And I think people are trying to do the best that they can in this time, but I kind of like what Randy says, I don't think that we actually address what's actually taking place. We're just kind of in that natural flow, trying to make things happen.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that, Danny. Coping with change is a big deal. Change is inevitable, as I say, and growth is optional. And there's a lot of wisdom that God says about change and leadership as well. Here's another one, Randy. How about understanding triggers? And what are triggers, and are people able to identify their triggers?
Yeah. Well, triggers are, by definition, if you look at the verb tense of what a trigger is, it's basically a cause or of something to happen or exist, right? So, for example, if I eat something that I'm allergic to, I'm going to have a reaction, right? So it triggers something within my body, and then I have a certain type of reaction and so forth. Well, when it comes to our emotional triggers, or our mental triggers, there are things that we respond to. That's what a trigger is. It's something that happens that causes us to respond a certain way to something. And a lot of times we can respond in a negative way, or we can respond in a more healthy and positive way. And what happens, all of us do have triggers. We have that one thing that gets under our skin, that one thing that just sets us off or really sets us in a certain direction. And for some people, it's more extreme than others. For some people, it takes very little to set them off and get them going. And then there's other people it takes a long time to get them going, but everybody has those triggers. And so forth. And the key is to really understand what your trigger is. What is it that gets you to the point where you're responding or reacting in a very unhealthy or unrighteous way, for example, or unholy way? Understanding what that is, and then being able to find a way to really counteract that trigger, that moment, so that you don't respond in such a negative way. I think that's very key. And so identifying the triggers is being able to first acknowledge that there is certain things that trigger you and understanding what that is. For some people, they can't handle, for example, alcohol or handle certain things that, because maybe in their past they struggled with it. So it wouldn't be a wise idea for them to show up to a big social gathering where all they're serving is alcohol. For example, it can trigger them and send them down a negative pathway. So things like that, or understanding just the things that pushes our buttons, for example, is very important. Triggers are important, I think, but that's part of a discussion that we can get into when we start really uncovering what those triggers may look like for each one of us. We all have them. You just have to really be willing to identify what that trigger looks like and then figure out how we counteract those triggers.
And it could be the smallest thing, right? And you never know what small thing is going to create a whole tidal wave or tsunami in your life. And I think it's important that we understand these triggers and learn to deal with them as they come. So I appreciate you talking about that, Randy. And here's another topic that we're looking at. It's counseling versus coping. Danny, how is it a stigma or strategy?
Well, I believe that it is very strategic, and I think like Randy mentioned earlier, there has to be a place for it, for both counseling and a place to cope, right? To face and deal with the responsibilities and problems and challenges that you're going through. I think that it becomes a stigma when we try to write it off, as he mentioned earlier, when we try to when we do identify it with a very negative attachment to our self-image. I think that's when it becomes a stigma. And it becomes challenging for people to actually get the counseling. But, I'm a big proponent in, if you do need help, you do need to address it, and you do need to reach out and get the proper channels. And truthfully, having a strong network of people around you that can help you and get the counseling that you need is a huge win for you if you are struggling with these things.
Mm-hmm.
Breaking down that wall of stigma versus strategy. And I agree with you, Danny. I believe it is a very strategic move to get counseling where you see fit. And Christian counselors, I think, are better than not. But, if you have a good man or good woman in your life that can give you that counseling, please seek it. So at least vet them out. Last topic we're going to probably cover over this this journey, and it could be more that we might uncover more topics as we unfold this, but transparency is a good topic. Of why is transparency a friend or foe, Randy?
Well, I think, again, transparency to me is a double-edged sword in many ways. It can be considered a proverbial double-edged sword, from the sense that while we need transparency, sometimes our resistance to transparency is that the reactions we will get in response to our transparency, right? So, for example, and I won't get into my story today fully because we don't have time, but one of the biggest struggles I had as a pastor and as a leader was trying to find out or figure out who could I talk to, who could I be transparent with about my weaknesses or my challenges and what I was struggling with internally. And because I was concerned about the reactions I was going to get, then that challenged me and that kept me from sharing and being open about it. Because here's the thing, gentlemen. What happens a lot of times with us, particularly as leaders, is that we yearn to be loved. We want to be respected, right? What I learned is that when you make a mistake, or if you fall, or if whatever the case is, and you come up short and something has happened, I've learned the hard way that people can forgive you. They can choose to love you, but sometimes they don't respect you. And that's the challenge of it. That's where becoming more transparent sometimes is a challenge to pastors and leaders, because while we want people's love, we want people's trust, we also want people's respect. And one of the things we have to learn as believers, as men and women of God, is that everybody falls short. But just because we fall short doesn't mean that we're done for, that person is done for. And so when it comes to transparency, that's the challenge of transparency, is that often people don't want to be transparent because they don't want to lose the respect of their peers, of other pastors, of other leaders. To this day, there are some people who were able to forgive me, they were able to love me, but then they no longer respected me. But however, there were many who heard my story, learned about it, and they embraced me, they loved me, and they respected me. But I did find that if we're going to really be catalysts or agents of change where we're helping others, then we have to become more transparent with people to let them see that even, that we're not only spiritual warriors in the kingdom of God, but we're also human. And that human element will always exist as long as we are in this terra firma we call flesh. So we have to be willing to push and encourage transparency, because when we do that, when we set the culture within our church to become more healthy by being more open and honest rather than masking ourselves. So that's my thoughts.
That is wonderful. And I think that's really important when we're talking about being transparent in this space. This space that we're going to provide for leaders is really about giving you a platform to share, but also hearing really real world experiences, things that we've gone through. And Randy and Danny have shared some things today on this brief overview of the topics that we're going to discuss. And there's so much more to uncover, not only for you to be spiritually healthy, but also emotionally healthy. And so we want to be able to take you on this journey and give you the space to do it here in Culture Transformation Network, CTN. So thank you guys for this quick overview today and brief overview, kind of an outline of the syllabus we're going to be covering. And just look forward to this as we move down this journey. We're going to be doing having experts on that are really leaders in this field, trainings. We'll be doing gatherings as well, more in-depth on each topic, as you don't want to miss everything that we have going on with this podcast or video, or maybe even blogs that are coming your way as well. So invite others, get excited about this, as we're excited to be able to go down this journey and uncover a lot of things with you as well, because we're leaders and we're growing just as you're growing as well. So join us on this journey, and we appreciate your time. Thank you, Randy Dean. Thank you, Danny James, for your time today, and we're going to be seeing you guys very, very soon.